Section 2, Chapter 2 of the Life and Adventures of Kit Carson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Dorr. The Life and Adventures of Kit Carson by DeWitt C. Peters. Section 2, Chapter 2. The news of defeat of Mr. Young's trapping party by the Indian reaches Taos. Young raises a party to chastise the Indians. Kit Carson becomes a conspicuous member of the expedition. The Indians are found on Salt River. The fight. Trapping exploits. A new country. Trials and vicissitudes. Sacramento Valley. California and its Roman Catholic missions in 1829. Another Indian fight. Sale of furs. Indian depredations. Kit Carson and 12 trappers engage with the Indians in a battle. Return to the camp with recovered property. The news of the attack and defeat of his men by the Indians was brought to Mr. Ewing Young at Taos by a member of the unfortunate expedition. On learning the causes which brought this unpleasant termination to his enterprise, Mr. Young raised a party of 40 men, consisting of Americans, Canadians, and Frenchmen, and put himself at its head. Kit Carson was received into the party, and soon became one of its most prominent and efficient aides. Mr. Young's object was twofold: first, to chastise the Indians, and second, to make all he could out of the expedition by employing the men in their calling as trappers. Under the Mexican laws, licenses were required from the government to all Mexicans who set out on trapping expeditions. These were not granted to citizens of the United States. This was not the mere will of government officials. The Mexican statutory law prohibited the granting of licenses to citizens of the United States. The law was, however, often made a dead letter by Americans, for they frequently but stealthily evaded it. In order, therefore, to hoodwink the Mexican authorities, Mr. Young had to resort to various expedients. His preparations were so carefully and secretly made, that the real business he had in contemplation did not transpire, or even a suspicion gain currency as to his intended whereabouts. In April, 1829, the party set out, eager to bring about results equal to their anticipations. At first, to avoid the curiosity and inquiring disposition of the Mexicans, they traveled northward, as if their destination was into the territory of the United States. Hints had been sufficiently freely bestowed upon the Mexicans to lead them to believe that such was the destination of the party. After journeying 50 miles in this direction, and feeling themselves free from the scrutiny of the Mexican authorities, they changed their course to the southwest, and traveled through the country occupied by the Navajos, who are an interesting and dangerous race of Indians, even to the trader of this day. On their route, the company passed through Zuni, a Pueblo town. Thence they traveled to the head of the Salt River, one of the tributaries of the Rio Gila. Here they discovered the band of Indians who had attacked and defeated the former party. As soon as the Indians discovered the party of trappers, they became eager for the affray. The usual preliminaries for such fights were, therefore, quickly made on both sides. Young directed the greater part of his men to lie in ambush, for he felt confident that the Indians did not know his strength. The bands of savages who covered the hills round about mistook the halt necessary to complete the ambush for cowardice and fear on the part of the whites. At this their courage arose to such a degree that they made a bold charge against, as they supposed, the small party of white men who were visible. They were allowed to advance well into the trap, until, by the position of the trappers in ambush, they came under a crossfire. At the word of command, a general volley was fired into the advance column. 15 warriors fell dead, and many others were wounded. The Indians became panic-stricken, and the trappers, immediately following up their advantage, advanced from cover. The warriors did not rally for a second attack, but fled in every direction, leaving Young with his party masters of the field. Strange as it has ever seemed to the inquiring mind, in those days and for many succeeding years, companies of white men from 50 to 60 in number could wage successful war against whole tribes of Indians who could easily muster 1,000 fighting men. A reason often given for this is, that the trappers of the western wilds are invariably dead shots with the rifle and well versed in Indian strategy. On the other hand, the red men were, comparatively speaking, poorly armed, and could not travel together for any length of time in large parties, because they depended for food chiefly upon hunting. Had there existed no other cause, the means of obtaining provision being limited, must have compelled them to separate. Very frequently whole tribes are reduced to depend upon daily hunts. The bravery of the Indians is of a different stamp from that which is exhibited by the whites, especially where the white man is a simon pure Western trapper. The white man on the prairie or in the mountains knows but too well that if attacked by Indians he must conquer or die. It was, and is, seldom that a company out on an expedition has any place of refuge to which it may retreat. Here is the principal reason why the trapper is so seldom defeated. He cannot afford to lose his life to a certainty, and consequently will not allow a defeat. After this fight, Young's party trapped down the Salt River to San Francisco River, and thence on up to the head of the latter stream. The Indians failed not to hover on their pathway, and to make nightly attacks upon their party. Frequently, they would crawl into camp and steal a trap, or kill a mule or a horse, and do whatever other damages they could secretly. At the head of the San Francisco River the company was divided. It was so arranged that one party was to proceed to the valley of the Sacramento in California. Of this detachment Kit Carson was a member. The other party had orders to return to New Mexico for the purpose of procuring traps to replace those stolen. The latter party was also commissioned to take and dispose of the stock of beaver already on hand. The party bound for California was 18 in number. Of this party Mr. Young took command. Previous to setting out, a few days were devoted to hunting. They only succeeded, however, in killing 3 deer. The meat of these animals they prepared to take with them, as they were about to journey into a country never before explored. The skins of the 3 deer were converted into tanks for carrying water. They had learned from some friendly Indians that the country over which they had to pass en route was destitute of water. The red men told them additionally that the valley, meaning the Sacramento, was beautiful, and that the streams were full of beaver. All of this information the trappers found was true. For 4 days they traveled over a barren country where not one drop of water could be found. At each night's camping place, small allowances of water from the tanks was distributed by the commander to each man and animal. A guard was then stationed over the remainder to prevent any accident from depriving the company of this now precious article of sustenance. At the close of the 4th day, however, they again found water. The instinct exhibited by the pack mules on this occasion was truly remarkable. Long before any member of the party thought that water was so near, the mules, with unerring certainty, had smelt it, and each one, according to his remaining strength, had hurried on to partake of it. The result was, that when the first mule had reached the water, the remainder were scattered along upon the trail for a great distance. The company encamped here and remained 2 days to recruit. The journey was renewed on the 3rd day, the route being still over a similar kind of country, necessitating both man and beast to submit to similar privations as to water. In 4 days more they came in sight of the great canyon of the Colorado, which failed not to awaken a thrill of delight in every member of the party. Just before reaching the canyon they met a party of Mojave Indians, of whom they purchased an old mare. She was killed and eaten by the party with great gusto. The party remained 3 days on the banks of the Colorado, recruiting their strength. While remaining here, another party of Mojave Indians visited them, from whom they procured a small quantity of corn and beans. Leaving the Colorado, they recommenced their journey and traveled southwest. In 3 days they arrived at a stream which rises in the Coast Range, runs northeast, and is lost in the sands of the Great Basin. About 2 years previous to their arrival here, 3 trappers, by the names of Smith, Sublette, and Jackson, with a large party of men, had a desperate fight in this neighborhood with hostile Indians. They also had learned from friendly Indians of the wonders of the Sacramento Valley, and were en route to explore it when attacked. 4 only out of their entire company escaped with their lives. These succeeded in making their ways to the nearest Mexican settlements, which they reached in a state of complete destitution, after many hardships. Young and his party followed the dry bed of this river for several days before they came to any visible water. It may be interesting to some of our readers to know that there are many of these curious rivers in Western America, which for miles disappear from the surface of the earth, and probably run through the quicksand beneath as they reappear again. The outline of the river usually exists between the place of its disappearance and the place where the water again comes to the surface of the earth. By digging a few feet into the sand within the outline, the water is generally obtained. It takes but a short time, however, for the hole thus made to fill up again. On quitting this river, the party journeyed to the westward, and in 4 days came to the Mission of San Gabriel. Here they found one Roman Catholic priest, 15 Mexican soldiers, and about 1,000 Indians. Belonging to this little colony were 80,000 head of cattle, fine fields and vineyards. Literally, the work and life of the Jewish patriarchs were here being reenacted. A shepherd on the mighty plain, he watched his roving store. To the half-starved followers of Mr. Young, this mission appeared to be a paradise of earth. They remained here, however, but 1 day. Having nothing else to trade, they parted with their butcher knives, receiving for 4 of them 1 fat ox. It would all appear a fabulous tale were we to incorporate into this narrative a history, or even a slight description, of the immensity of the herds of horses and cattle which once roamed over the plains and valleys of California and New Mexico. It is but a few years since that some wealthy Mexicans owned herds in these parts of America which they numbered by tens of thousands. They were, however, almost valueless for want of a market, and until the tide of emigration poured in, developing the resources of the country by its demand for provisions and labor, horses and cattle were sold for a mere trifle. In 1 day's march from San Gabriel, Young and his party arrived at another Roman Catholic mission called San Fernando. This establishment was on a much smaller scale than the first. Young and his hardy followers, however, stopped only for a few hours, pushed on for the Sacramento River, which proved to be distant only a few days' march. Their course from San Fernando was northeast. The last part of their journey led through a delightful tract of country, where water, grass, and game existed in abundance, seemingly a foretaste of the success which awaited their further advance. Selecting an eligible camping site, Young here rested his party for some time. When they were fully recruited, the party started for the San Joaquin and commenced trapping down the river. What gave the men great surprise, they discovered unmistakable signs of another trapping party. In a short time it appeared that they were close to a party belonging to the Hudson's Bay Company, commanded by Peter Ogden. Young's men, however, continued setting their traps on the San Joaquin and its tributaries. The 2 parties were near each other for some time, and as deer, elk, and antelope existed by thousands around them, which it was no trouble to kill in any numbers desirable, they fared well. On again reaching the Sacramento River, the 2 parties separated. Mr. Ogden with his party set out for the Columbia River, while Mr. Young's party encamped where they were for the remainder of the summer. As the season for trapping had passed, they employed their time in hunting and preparing meat for future necessity. It was here that Kit Carson soon distinguished himself as a superior hunter, which reputation he has maintained ever since, no matter who have been his antagonists. Not but that Kit may have had his equals, but that it is next to an impossibility to find his superior. At all events, the world has given Kit Carson the title of Nestor of the Rocky Mountains, for his reputation as a hunter alone. And as his biographer, we take pleasure in recording the facts by which the title has been earned and maintained. Let the reader possess himself of the facts, as they shall appear divested of any and every picture which fancy or partiality may accidentally cause us to paint. And even then Kit Carson will not lose the title. On the contrary, it will become the more indelibly stamped upon his brow. During the sojourn of the trappers on the Sacramento, an event occurred which exhibited the readiness with which these men responded to calls upon them for aid in a just cause. A few of the Indians belonging to the mission of the San Rafael, after committing some excesses, deserted from those to whom they had pretended friendship. The priest having charge of the mission sent a strong force to search for the fugitives. They were found secreted in an Indian village, the inhabitants of which were not on friendly terms with the priest's party. A demand was made that the deserters should be given up, which being refused, a fight ensued, and the priest's party was defeated. Assistance was now asked from the trappers. The request was complied with by Carson and 11 of his companions, who volunteered for the occasion. Thus reinforced, the vanquished party returned and resumed the fight, but with a far different result. The Indian village was captured, and 1/3 of its inhabitants killed. The day following, a second demand to deliver up the deserters was complied with. Carson and his companions then left the priest's party and rejoined their camp. A short time after this affair had happened, Mr. Young carried the furs he had on hand to the mission of San Rafael, where he was so fortunate as to find a captain of a trading schooner to whom he succeeded in disposing of the entire stock. With the money accruing from the sale, he purchased horses and then rejoined his company. A circumstance occurred a few days after Mr. Young's return, which proved to be a good warning to the party for their future vigilance. During one dark night, some Indians, eluding the watch of the sentinels, succeeded in entering the camp and moving off 60 horses. As soon as the robbery was discovered, which had been the more easily accomplished because the trappers, not apprehending danger, had allowed the animals to take care of themselves, Mr. Young directed Kit Carson to take 12 men with the remaining horses, 14 in number, and pursue the thieves. Carson, in obedience to his orders, immediately started for the Sierra Nevada mountains, following the trail of the Indians. After traveling 100 miles, he came up with the robbers, and discovered them in the act of feasting upon horseflesh, 6 of their own animals having been killed to supply the viands. Doubtless stolen fruit made the feast all the sweeter to the savages, but Kit determined to mingle a little of the bitter as a condiment to the roasted flesh. Gathering his men well together, and approaching very close to the foe without being discovered, he gave the order to charge. His men needed no second command. They fell upon the feasting savages like a thunderbolt, scattering them right and left without mercy. 8 of the warriors were killed in the short conflict which ensued. The remainder were allowed to escape. With some difficulty they next succeeded in recovering all their horses, except the 6 which had been killed. With their horses and 3 children taken prisoners, they returned to camp. It is unnecessary to add that to the men thus isolated in the wilderness, Kit and his party were hailed with joyful greetings when their complete success became known. To them their horses were like the good ship to the hardy sailors on the mighty ocean. The joyful reaction which followed such complete success was in ratio to the fears which the continuing suspense had excited. Kit Carson, though at that day a youth in years and experience when compared with the other members of the party of which he was then an associate, had risen rapidly in the estimation of all, and had excited the admiration and enlisted in his behalf the confidence of the entire band. When called upon to add his counsel and advice to the general fund of knowledge offered by the trappers concerning any doubtful or difficult enterprise, his masterly foresight and shrewdness, as well as clearness in attending to details, alone gave him willing auditors. But it was the retired manner and modest deportment which he invariably wore that won for him the love of his associates. Such characteristics failed not to surprise, in no ordinary degree, those who could boast a long lifetime of experience in Indian countries. Kit Carson's powers of quickly conceiving thoughts on difficult emergencies, which pointed out the safest and best plans of action, just the things that ought to be done, and his bravery, which in his youth sometimes amounted to rashness, were the component parts of his ability which thus caused his companions to follow his leadership. His courage, promptitude, willingness, self-reliance, caution, sympathy, and care for the wounded marked him at once as the mastermind and safest counselor. His first trapping expedition gained him so much credit that from the time it was concluded he found no difficulty in joining any band of trappers, no matter how select the party. In this respect, the mountaineers resemble seafaring men, who invariably dislike new and untried hands, because such are so apt to give more trouble than assistance. Green hands, therefore, are treated with indifference when they apply to be admitted as members on a contemplated hunt. The reader will here see one difficulty which had to be overcome by Carson, and which kept him so long in want of employment. From this time Kit carried a rifle and worked from an experience which commanded admiration, respect, and esteem wherever he went, and with whatever party he became connected. Like the great Napoleon, when he joined the army for his first campaign, he was a hero in spite of his youth among men, grown gray with experience. End of Section 2, Chapter 2.